I'm not the kind of man people remember. At least, I wasn't until the day my life collided with someone else's in the worst possible way. By lunchtime, I'd been marched out of the tallest office tower in Harbor Point with a cardboard box under my arm, branded a thief without anyone bothering to hear my side, and before the sun went down, I was standing in front of a burning SUV, pulling the daughter of the woman who destroyed my career out of a wall of flames. Funny how life works sometimes. It'll knock you flat, then hand you one impossible decision that tells you exactly what kind of person you really are. My name is Isaiah Brooks. I'm 39 years old. I'm black. I'm a widower, and for nearly 8 years I pushed a janitor's cart through the polished hallways of Northbridge Dynamics, one of the richest tech companies on the East Coast. Most people never looked at me long enough to remember my face. They'd glance up from their phones just enough to avoid bumping into my mop bucket, maybe nod if they were having a particularly good day, then disappear into meetings worth more money than I'd see in a lifetime. I didn't take it personally. Invisible people hear things. Invisible people notice things. Invisible people survive. Every morning started the same way. My alarm buzzed at 4. I'd slide quietly out of bed so I wouldn't wake my little girl, make coffee that honestly tasted more like burnt hope than coffee, then stand in the kitchen for a second looking at the framed picture of my wife, Danielle. She'd been gone almost 4 years, but some mornings I still caught myself expecting to hear her humming while she packed lunchboxes. Cancer doesn't care how good a person you are. It just takes what it wants and leaves everybody else to figure out how to keep breathing afterward. Before she died, she grabbed my hand with what little strength she had left and whispered something I've never forgotten. Promise me our girl grows up knowing she's loved every single day. I made that promise, and every decision after that belonged to it. My daughter, Naomi, had just turned 8. She was the funniest kid you'd ever meet. Always making jokes that somehow landed better than most adults. Always carrying around whatever book she'd fallen in love with that week. But she also lived with a congenital heart condition that meant hospitals weren't an occasional inconvenience. They were part of our routine. Medication, specialist appointments, tests, more medication. Insurance covered enough to keep hope alive, but never enough to let you sleep peacefully. That's why I worked as a janitor instead of chasing the engineering career I'd once dreamed about. The schedule fit Naomi's life better than mine. I could walk her to school, pick her up after work, cook dinner, help with homework, and still be there every night when she asked me to read just one more chapter, which somehow always became 3. To me, that wasn't sacrifice. That was wealth. That Tuesday morning, Mrs. Jenkins, the retired nurse who watched Naomi before school, texted me a picture of my daughter covered in pancake syrup, grinning like she'd won the lottery. She says don't forget chapter 8 tonight, the message read. I laughed right there while wiping fingerprints off the executive conference room windows, and for a second the whole world felt manageable again. Then I heard heels clicking across the marble floor, sharp and steady like a metronome, counting down to trouble. Everyone at Northbridge recognized that sound. Victoria Langford, the CEO. She wasn't cruel for sport. That would have been easier to understand. She believed perfection was the only language success respected, and everybody around her either kept up or got left behind. She stopped without looking directly at me. There's trash in the executive lounge. Her voice was calm enough to make you nervous. I'd rather not see it twice. Yes, ma'am, I answered. She gave one quick nod and disappeared around the corner. That was the longest conversation we'd ever had. As I wheeled my cart toward the 46th floor, I remember thinking how strange it was that 2 people could spend years inside the same building and know absolutely nothing about each other. She had no idea I once spent nights designing network security systems before life unraveled. She didn't know I'd traded patents for paychecks that came with health insurance. She didn't know the man scrubbing her floors measured every hour against whether his little girl would someday get the surgery that might save her life. Then again, I didn't know she was carrying burdens of her own. That realization would come much later, after far too much damage had already been done. The executive office was unusually busy that morning. Victoria was preparing for a billion-dollar merger presentation. Executives rushed in and out carrying binders and laptops. Assistants whispered into headsets, and everyone looked one mistake away from panic. I should have walked away when I saw the office occupied. Company policy said to come back later. But coming back later meant missing Naomi's cardiology appointment that afternoon. So I knocked softly, heard no response, and eased the door open just enough to empty the trash without disturbing anyone. It should have taken less than 30 seconds. Instead, one careless movement, one coffee cup bounced too close to the edge of an expensive desk, changed everything. The cup tipped so slowly it almost felt like the universe was giving me enough time to stop it, enough time to fix it before it became real. But my sleeve caught the handle. The coffee rolled across the polished walnut desk, and a dark wave spilled over a stack of neatly organized documents. Victoria shot out of her chair before the mug even hit the carpet. "What did you just do?" she snapped, grabbing the soaked pages with both hands. I reached for the paper towels on my cart. "I'm sorry. Let me help." "Help?" she shot back, disbelief flashing across her face. "These are the only signed copies of the merger package. Do you understand what you've just destroyed? I'll stay as long as it takes. I'll help recover everything." She looked at me as if I'd suggested rebuilding a house with chewing gum. "No, you've done enough. Get out." There wasn't any screaming after that. Somehow the silence hurt more. I backed toward the door with my hands still full of paper towels, hearing assistants rush in behind me while lawyers started making frantic phone calls overseas. I stood outside that office for a long moment staring at my reflection in the glass. Funny thing about embarrassment, it doesn't just make you feel small. It makes you question every decision that brought you there. By the time I got downstairs, I had already convinced myself I'd probably lose a week's pay over the accident. Maybe get written up. Maybe have to explain to Naomi why Daddy couldn't afford that little stuffed elephant she'd been pointing at in the hospital gift shop. I never imagined things were about to get much worse. 2 days later, I was called into Human Resources just before lunch. The room smelled like old coffee and bad news. Sitting across the table was Denise Holloway from HR. Beside her stood Martin Cross, the head of corporate security, a man who smiled too often whenever somebody else was uncomfortable. "Mr. Brooks," Denise began carefully, "we're investigating several missing company devices." My stomach tightened. "Missing?" Martin slid a folder across the table. A company laptop disappeared from Executive Conference Room B. A corporate tablet vanished from Ms. Langford's office. Security records show you entered both locations. "Because I clean them every morning." "Convenient," Martin replied. "Very convenient." I felt heat rising into my face. Search my locker. Search my apartment. Search my truck. I didn't steal anything. Denise sighed before speaking again. "No criminal charges are being filed at this time." At this time, 4 words capable of draining every ounce of hope out of a room. "However, Miss Langford has requested your immediate termination pending the investigation." I honestly don't remember breathing for a second or two. What? "The decision has been finalized." Did anybody ask me what happened? Silence. "Did anybody ask whether I've ever stolen so much as a pen in 8 years? More silence. Martin stepped forward. "Badge." I slowly unclipped my employee ID and laid it on the table. It made the smallest sound when it hit the wood. Just a little click. But somehow it sounded like 8 years of my life coming to an end. Denise wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. Quietly, she whispered, "For what it's worth, I don't think you did it." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because sometimes laughing is the only thing keeping you from breaking apart. Funny how that doesn't change anything. They walked me through the lobby like I was dangerous. Every face I passed carried a different expression. Some looked away. Some pretended not to notice. A young accountant named Melissa actually stood up from her desk. "Isaiah," she called softly. "What's going on?" I forced a smile. "Guess I'm finally getting a day off." She knew I was lying. We both did. Outside, I sat in my pickup truck with the cardboard box on the passenger seat. Inside were 2 uniforms, a family photo, my coffee mug that read "World's Okayest Dad," and a birthday card Naomi had drawn with crooked crayons. I stared at that card for a long time before starting the engine. How do you tell an 8-year-old her father just lost the job that keeps her alive? I didn't have an answer. I drove across town to pick Naomi up from school pretending everything was normal. Kids have a way of seeing through lies adults think are invisible. She climbed into the truck, buckled herself in, looked over at me and asked, "You okay, Daddy?" I smiled too quickly. "Long day." She studied me for another second. "Mrs. Jenkins says long days make pancakes taste better." I laughed despite myself. "Does she now?" "Yep. Science. That's Naomi." Somehow she could always find light hiding in places I couldn't. We stopped by her cardiologist's office for a routine checkup. Dr. Alvarez looked over her latest scans longer than usual before finally smiling. "She's stable. but we're getting closer to needing surgery. Stable. Another one of those words that sounds comforting until you realize it only means not worse, not better. Walking out of the hospital, Naomi slipped her tiny hand into mine. Daddy? Yeah, if I ever get scared, you'll still be there, right? That question hit harder than losing my job ever could. I squeezed her hand. Baby, there isn't anywhere on this earth I wouldn't be. About 40 minutes later, rain started falling so hard the highway looked like somebody had dumped an ocean across it. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Red brake lights stretched for miles ahead. Then, a deafening crash echoed somewhere in front of us. A black SUV spun across 3 lanes, slammed into the guardrail, flipped onto its side, and within seconds smoke poured from underneath the hood. Cars stopped. People screamed. Nobody moved. I pulled onto the shoulder before my brain had time to argue with my heart. Daddy? Naomi whispered, fear filling her eyes. Stay in the truck. Lock the doors. Don't get out unless a police officer tells you. But, promise me. Her lip trembled. I promise. I ran toward the wreck through sheets of rain. Flames burst beneath the engine. Someone yelled that there was still a little girl trapped inside. Then I looked through the shattered side window, and my entire world stopped. Sitting terrified behind the jammed seatbelt was the same little girl I'd seen once walking through Northbridge holding Victoria Langford's hand. I saw her eyes before I recognized her face. Fear looks the same on every child, no matter where they come from or how much money their parents have. She couldn't have been older than 9. Her hands were shaking so badly, she couldn't get the seatbelt to release. Smoke was pouring through the broken windshield, and somewhere underneath that twisted SUV, I could hear gasoline hissing onto the pavement. Every instinct I had screamed that the vehicle was about to ignite. I grabbed the bent door handle and pulled with everything I had. Nothing. I planted my feet against the slick asphalt and pulled again. Metal groaned, but it wouldn't give. Someone behind me yelled, "Man, get back. It's gonna blow." Maybe they were right. Maybe I should have stepped away. But then I heard that little girl's voice, barely louder than a whisper. Please, don't leave me. There are some words a father simply cannot ignore. I found a chunk of broken guardrail lying beside the wreck, jammed it into the window frame, and threw my weight against it. Glass exploded across my arms. The door shifted just enough for me to reach inside. The heat hit my face like opening an oven. Look at me, I told her. Don't look at the fire. Look at me. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded. What's your name? Amelia. All right, Amelia. I'm Isaiah, and we're getting out of here together. My fingers fought with the twisted buckle until it finally snapped loose. I pulled her into my arms just as flames burst beneath the dashboard. We stumbled across the wet highway, and I had barely made it 10 yards before the SUV erupted behind us with a blast so loud it rattled my ribs. The force knocked both of us onto the pavement. I curled my body around hers without thinking. That's what fathers do. We protect first. We count the cost later. Sirens filled the air within seconds. Paramedics rushed toward us. Amelia clung to my jacket for one brief moment, then looked up with wide, exhausted eyes. Are you okay? She asked. I laughed, even though both of my hands felt like they were on fire. I'm gonna be just fine. She smiled faintly before the medics lifted her onto a stretcher. I could have stayed. I could have told the police my name. I could have waited for someone to thank me. Instead, I looked at the angry red burns climbing across both of my hands and remembered something a nurse once told Danielle years ago. Children remember calm more than courage. Amelia didn't need another frightened face in her memory. She needed to remember someone telling her she was safe, so I quietly walked back toward my truck. Naomi was already crying when I opened the door. She wrapped both arms around me so tightly I almost forgot about the pain. You scared me, she whispered. I know. Baby. Her eyes dropped to my blistered hands. You're hurt. It'll heal. She looked out through the rain toward the flashing lights. Did the little girl make it? I nodded. Yeah, she did. Naomi leaned her head against my shoulder and smiled, the kind of smile only children can wear after seeing something terrifying. Mom would have been proud of you. I couldn't answer right away. My throat simply wouldn't let me. The emergency room doctor wrapped my hands that evening and warned me I wouldn't be able to work for several weeks. I almost laughed at that. I didn't have a job anymore. 2 days passed before the truth finally caught up with everyone else. The missing laptop hadn't been stolen. Martin Cross had taken it home to finish a presentation and forgotten to log it out. The tablet had been misplaced during the merger chaos and later found inside a locked conference cabinet. There had never been a thief, only assumptions. Victoria Langford reportedly stood frozen when security explained what had happened. Then Amelia woke up at the hospital and quietly told her mother, "The janitor from your building saved me." That's when the weight of every decision Victoria had made crashed down all at once. She searched for me everywhere. My apartment, Naomi's school, the hospital. Even Northbridge employees started calling people they knew, hoping somebody had seen us. By then I'd already packed what little we owned and rented a tiny house outside the city, not because I hated anyone, because sometimes when life breaks you, the only thing you know how to do is keep moving. A week later, while Naomi was finishing another round of cardiac tests, I heard a familiar voice behind me, "Mr. Brooks." I turned around. Victoria stood there looking nothing like the woman who had dismissed me from her office. There wasn't any arrogance left, only exhaustion. For a long second, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "I was wrong." 4 simple words. But they looked painfully heavy coming out of her mouth. "The investigation cleared you. There was never any evidence against you." I let pressure, pride, and my own fear make decisions that destroyed an innocent man's life. I glanced toward Naomi, who was laughing with a volunteer across the hallway. "My daughter doesn't know I lost faith in people," I said quietly. "I'd like to keep it that way." Tears filled Victoria's eyes. "Your burns? My daughter told me what you did. She would have done the same for Naomi." Victoria shook her head. "No, I don't think everyone would have." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a formal apology, a job offer far beyond the one I'd lost, and full medical coverage that would pay for every treatment Naomi still needed. I looked back at her. Why? Because saying sorry without changing anything is just another way of protecting yourself. That answer stayed with me. I accepted the medical help for Naomi, not because my pride disappeared, but because being a father had always mattered more than being proud. As for the job, I told her I'd think about it. Some bridges can be rebuilt, but only if both people are willing to carry the weight. Months later, after Naomi's surgery was declared a success and Amelia was back in school, I walked into Northbridge again, not as the invisible man pushing a cleaning cart, but as Director of Operations and Employee Well-Being, a position created to make sure nobody else would ever be judged before being heard. The first thing I did wasn't redesign an office or rewrite a policy. I learned every custodian's name, every security guard's name, every cafeteria worker's name, because respect costs nothing, and somehow it's still one of the rarest things in the world. Sometimes people ask whether I truly forgave Victoria. The honest answer is, forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a choice you keep making every time the memory comes back. She earned that chance by changing, not by apologizing. And maybe that's the part of this story that matters most. So now, I want to hear from you. If you had been in my shoes, would you have accepted her apology and gone back to the company? Or would you have walked away forever? Was justice served? Or was forgiveness asking too much? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because stories like this don't really end when the credits roll. They end when people decide what they would have done differently. And if this story meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes that character is revealed, not when life is easy, but when the world gives you every reason to become someone you're not.